Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I was really young when this happened, and for a long time, I tried to tell myself it was just a kid being dumb. Maybe it was. Maybe I made a mistake and overreacted. But even now, years later, when I think back on it, my chest tightens in the same way it did that day. I still remember how real the fear felt, how fast my heart was beating, and how alone I felt in those few minutes. Whatever it was, it stuck with me. I had just gotten a brand new bike. It was one of those moments that felt huge when you're a kid. New bike, shiny paint, smooth tires, the kind of thing that makes you feel like you suddenly have freedom. I couldn't wait to ride it. The problem was that my parents had very clear rules. I was not allowed to leave our street. I could ride up and down, back and forth, but that was it. No nearby neighborhoods, no shortcuts, no exploring. I agreed. At least, I said I agreed. The truth is, the moment my parents turned their backs, I broke that rule. I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't so young that I didn't understand right from wrong. I knew I'd get in trouble if I got caught. I just didn't care. The excitement of riding that bike and the curiosity of what was beyond my street felt stronger than the fear of punishment. So I pedaled off. At first, everything felt normal. I rode into a nearby neighborhood, one I had seen plenty of times but never explored on my own. The houses looked similar, the streets were quiet, and nothing seemed out of place. I remember feeling proud, like I was getting away with something. I was just riding, minding my own business, enjoying the feeling of speed and independence. That's when the van showed up. It pulled up alongside me slowly. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to match my speed. I remember glancing over and seeing a man in the driver's seat. He rolled his window down and asked if I needed a ride. I said no. That should have been the end of it. A normal person would have driven away. But he didn't. Instead, he kept talking. He asked questions. Where was I going? How far was my house? Was I tired? He kept insisting, even though I had already said no. Something about the way he spoke made my stomach drop. I can't explain it clearly. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the persistence, the fact that he didn't accept my answer. Every instinct in my body started screaming that something was wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't try to be polite. I just turned my bike around and started pedaling as fast as I could back toward home. I didn't look back at first. I just rode. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The van wasn't gone. I glanced back and saw the man making a U-turn. Not slowly, not casually. He was turning around to follow me. Panic hit me all at once. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't care. All I could think was that I needed to get away. I needed to get home. To get back to my street, I had to cross a busy road. Normally, I would have stopped and waited. That day, I didn't. I barely slowed down. I shot across the street without thinking, narrowly missing cars that honked and slammed on their brakes. I didn't even look at the drivers. I just kept going. Instead of riding straight to my street, I made a split-second decision. I turned down the street that ran behind my house. My neighbor lived there, and their yard backed up to ours. I knew their fence was shorter. I knew I could climb it. I raced into their driveway, jumped off my bike, and abandoned it right there. I didn't even bother laying it down carefully. I just dropped it and ran. Their yard felt enormous in that moment. Every step felt slow, like I was moving through water. I reached the fence, scrambled over it, scraped my hands and legs, and then reached over the taller fence that separated their yard from mine. I grabbed the top, swung my body, and dropped into my own backyard. The moment my feet hit the ground, I crouched down and held my breath. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I slowly crept toward the wooden fence and looked through one of the small gaps between the boards. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. That's when I saw the van. It was driving slowly down my neighbor's street. Way too slowly. The man was clearly scanning the area. He stopped near my neighbor's house, looking toward the yard where my bike was sitting in plain view. My stomach sank. I realized what he must be thinking. He probably assumed that house was mine. The van sat there for what felt like forever. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. I remember thinking that if he got out of the van, I didn't know what I would do. I felt trapped in my own backyard, too scared to run, too scared to scream. Eventually, the van drove away. Not fast. Not in a rush. Just gone. The moment it disappeared, my legs gave out. I sat down in the grass and started crying. Not quiet crying. Full, shaking sobs. The kind that makes your chest hurt and your throat burn. I was safe, but the fear hadn't left yet. It lingered, heavy and suffocating. I stayed in the backyard for a long time before I worked up the courage to go inside. I didn't go get my bike. I couldn't. I didn't even want to look at it. My neighbor eventually noticed it and brought it back to me later, probably thinking nothing of it. I never told my parents what happened. At the time, I was more afraid of getting in trouble than anything else. I knew I had broken the rule. I knew they would be angry. In my kid logic, that felt worse than explaining what had happened. I convinced myself it wasn't that big of a deal, that I had handled it, that nothing actually happened. Looking back now, I realize how wrong that thinking was. I didn't ride my bike much after that. When I did, I stayed close to home. I watched every car that passed. I flinched when vans slowed down. I didn't trust strangers the same way anymore. It might sound small to some people. Nothing really happened, after all. But to me, that moment mattered. Something could have happened. And the fact that I still remember every detail tells me that my fear wasn't imaginary. I was just a kid who wanted to ride a new bike. And for a few terrifying minutes, I learned how quickly that kind of innocence can disappear. When I was about 13 years old, my grandparents owned a house right on the water. It was one of those places that felt like a secret world when you were a kid. The house sat on a long, narrow peninsula, surrounded on almost all sides by water and thick woods. The trees were tall and old, packed close together, and during the summer the leaves were so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground in some places. It always smelled like damp earth, moss, and lake water. Because my grandparents lived in Florida for about half the year, they treated the house like a family vacation place. All of their adult children were free to use it whenever they wanted. That meant that every now and then, my parents would take us there for weekends or longer stays. To me, it felt like absolute freedom. There were no neighbors close by, no traffic, no noise except insects, birds, and the occasional splash of something moving through the water. The woods around the house were crisscrossed with streams. Some were shallow and easy to hop across, while others were surprisingly deep and slow-moving. Over time, water had carved out pockets along these streams, creating little swimming holes. They weren't official or marked or anything like that. They were just places kids discovered and claimed. One of these swimming holes became my favorite. I don't know the exact depth anymore. At the time, it felt enormous. I remember thinking it had to be at least 12 or 15 feet deep. The water was dark and cloudy, especially once you went more than a few feet under the surface. You couldn't see the bottom clearly at all, just vague shapes and shadows. Even as a kid, I knew it was probably not the safest place to swim, but that didn't really register in my mind as something to avoid. It just made it more exciting. What made this spot even better was the rope swing. Someone, at some point long before I ever found the place, had tied a thick rope around a sturdy tree limb that hung out over the water. The rope was rough and weathered, but strong. You could grab it, run forward, swing out over the water, and let go at just the right moment. If you timed it perfectly, you'd fly out and drop straight down into the deepest part of the hole. To a kid, it felt like the coolest thing in the world. Looking back now, I realize how reckless it all was. The water was deep, the visibility was terrible, and there was no adult supervision anywhere nearby. But at 13, you don't think about those things. And you think you're invincible. You think nothing bad can happen to you. One afternoon, my parents decided to take a nap. The house was quiet, and the air was warm and still. I remember lying there, bored, listening to the distant sounds of water and insects drifting through the open windows. That's when I got the idea that it would be the perfect time to go swimming. Alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't ask permission. I just slipped out of the house and made my way through the woods toward the swimming hole. The path wasn't well defined, but I knew it by heart. I'd walked it enough times to recognize the way the ground dipped, where the roots stuck out, where the light changed. When I reached the swimming hole, everything looked the same as always. The water was calm, the rope hanging still from the tree branch. No one else was around. It felt peaceful and inviting. That's when another idea popped into my head. I wondered if I could touch the bottom. I had never tried before. I had jumped in plenty of times, but I always let myself float back up without really pushing it. That day, I decided to see just how deep it really was. I told myself it would be quick. I'd drop down, touch the bottom, and push back up. Simple. I pulled the rope back as far as I could, stepping backward until I was on my tiptoes. My arms were stretched, the rope tight. I took a breath, ran forward as fast as I could, and felt that familiar moment of weightlessness as my feet left the ground. Then I let go. The fall felt longer than usual. The water swallowed me instantly, the cold shock hitting my skin as I sank. I didn't fight it. I let myself drop straight down. I'm counting in my head, watching the light fade as everything turned darker and murkier. To my surprise, I actually hit the bottom. My feet touched something solid, and for a split second, I felt proud. I had done it. I reached the bottom. Without thinking too much about it, I pushed off with my legs, expecting to shoot back up toward the surface. Instead, I barely moved. I felt myself go up a few inches, and then something yanked me back down. At first, I was just confused. I tried again, kicking harder this time. Again, nothing. I went nowhere. That's when panic began to creep in. I looked down and tried to figure out what was happening, but the water was too cloudy. All I could see were vague shapes. In my mind, I realized that my swimming trunks must have gotten caught on something. Probably a submerged stump or a log. But fear doesn't listen to logic, especially when you're underwater and running out of air. In my panicked brain, it felt like something had grabbed me. I started struggling. I twisted my body, kicked, pulled at my shorts, anything I could think of. Each movement burned energy I didn't have. My lungs started screaming for air. The pressure in my chest became unbearable. Then my vision started to change. The edges of my sight began to darken. like someone slowly closing curtains around the world. Bright spots flashed in front of my eyes, little bursts of light that made it hard to focus. My lungs felt like they were on fire, like they were collapsing inward. Every instinct in my body was telling me to breathe, but I couldn't. I could feel myself starting to lose control. My limbs felt heavy, sluggish. My thoughts slowed down. The fight was draining out of me, replaced by a terrifying sense of fading away. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I was about to die. And then something happened. Through the murky water, I saw movement. A shape appeared near me. At first, I thought my brain was just making things up, like flashes in a dream. But the shape came closer, more defined. Hands reached for me. Those hands grabbed my shorts and pulled hard. I felt fabric tear. Suddenly, the pressure holding me down was gone. Someone grabbed me, wrapped an arm around me, and pushed upward. We shot toward the surface. The next thing I remember is bursting out of the water and sucking in air so hard it hurt. I coughed and gasped, barely able to keep myself afloat. When I looked around, I was alone. There was no one there. No adult. No other swimmer. No sign of anyone who could have saved me. The rope was still hanging motionless. The woods were silent. The water rippled gently, as if nothing had happened at all. The only physical proof of what I'd been through was a large tear in one leg of my bathing suit. I swam to the edge as fast as I could and dragged myself out, collapsing onto the muddy bank. I lay there for a long time, shaking, trying to catch my breath and understand what had just happened. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Eventually, I made my way back to the house. I didn't tell my parents what had happened. I didn't know how. I wasn't even sure what I believed myself. Over the years, I've thought about that moment countless times. I've gone back and forth about what really happened down there. And part of me is convinced that the figure I saw was nothing more than my oxygen-starved brain creating something to save itself. A hallucination. A last, desperate effort of survival. I think that somehow, in that final moment, my body found the strength to tear free. That the same instinct forced me upward, whether through swimming or buoyancy or sheer luck. The human mind is powerful, especially when it believes it's about to die. But even knowing all that, there's still a part of me that can't fully explain how real it felt. How clear the sensation of being grabbed was. How distinct that presence seemed. That swimming hole sat above my head for years, waiting quietly while I slept in my grandparents' house. And every time I think about it, I remember just how close I came to never leaving it at all. A few years ago, I went to visit my dad for the summer. He lived far up north in Minnesota, in a quiet area where nights felt longer and heavier than anywhere else I had lived. The kind of place where once the sun goes down, everything seems to hold its breath. There were trees everywhere, long empty roads, and a deep silence that settled in after dark. During the day, the house felt normal enough. At night, it felt different, still, too still. The house itself wasn't very big, but it was old and not very well insulated. The walls were thin, so thin that you could hear almost everything. Footsteps from the other side of the house, someone opening a door, even someone shifting their weight on the floor. Because of that, you always knew where everyone was. There were no surprises in that house, or at least, there weren't supposed to be. I slept in the guest bedroom during my stay. I never really liked that room, though I couldn't explain why. It just felt exposed. The layout didn't help. My bed was placed against one wall, and to the right of it was an open closet. Inside the closet was a large mirror. The mirror faced directly toward my bed, meaning that if I turned my head even slightly, I could see my reflection. The bedroom door was at the foot of the bed, perfectly aligned so that everything in the room felt connected in an uncomfortable way. Bed, door, mirror, all in line. I tried not to think about it. That night, I went to bed like usual. Nothing strange had happened earlier in the evening. My dad was watching TV in the living room. My older brother was in his room, and the house was quiet. I fell asleep without any trouble. Then I woke up, and I remember the time clearly because I checked my phone. It was 2:54 in the morning. I hadn't woken up from a dream. There was no loud noise. I just woke up suddenly, fully aware, staring into the darkness. My body felt alert in a way that didn't make sense for the middle of the night. I lay there for a moment, annoyed. I knew falling back asleep wouldn't be easy. I reached for my iPod, which I kept on the bed with me, and decided to listen to music. Music usually helped calm my mind enough to drift off again. When I checked the battery, it was at 4%. I stared at it, debating with myself. The charger was right there, just a couple of feet away. I could have leaned over, plugged it in, and saved myself the trouble. But I was tired, lazy, and already half comfortable. Instead of getting up, I decided to just lie there and deal with the boredom until sleep came back. I rolled onto my other side, facing away from the closet, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard the doorknob. At first, it was a small sound, a soft jiggling, like someone lightly testing the handle. I froze immediately. My eyes flew open and I stared toward the door. The sound continued, more urgent now, like someone was trying to open the door quietly but failing. My heart started racing. Then the jiggling stopped. The door slowly opened a few inches. I stared at that narrow gap in the door, my mind scrambling for an explanation. My first thought was my older brother. He liked messing with people, and it wouldn't be out of character for him to try to scare me. I told myself that's all it was, just him being an idiot. Trying to convince myself it wasn't serious, I closed my eyes again. Almost immediately, I heard footsteps. They were heavy footsteps, not sneaky, not light. The sound of a grown person walking with purpose. I heard them move past the foot of my bed. Each step was clear, deliberate, slow. Then the footsteps stopped somewhere in the middle of the room. My eyes opened again without me even thinking about it. I looked back at the door. It was still only open a few inches. No shadow crossed it. No movement. Just that same narrow crack. That's when I felt it. A deep, heavy feeling settled over me, starting at my back and spreading through my body. It felt like someone was standing very close to me, watching me. Not from across the room. Right there. Close enough to reach out and touch me. Fear flooded me all at once. I shut my eyes tight and slowly pulled the blanket up over my head and shoulders. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to move too fast. I was terrified that whatever was in the room would react if I did. I lay there completely still. My body felt frozen. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard across the house. Time stopped making sense. Seconds stretched into something that felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. I stayed there under the blanket, listening, waiting, hoping nothing would happen. Eventually, fear gave way to desperation. I needed to know. With shaking hands, I slowly lowered the blanket just enough to peek out. I opened my eyes and turned my head toward the closet mirror. What I saw made my blood run cold. In the mirror, I could see the silhouette of a large man standing right next to my bed. He wasn't standing upright. His upper body was crouched forward, like he was leaning down to get a better look at me. One arm was extended, reaching toward where I lay. There were no details, no face, no clothing, just a dark, solid shape that did not belong in that room. I have never felt terror like that in my life. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I started frantically patting the bed in front of me, searching for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely feel anything. I finally touched it, and, in my panic, accidentally pressed the play button instead of unlocking it. Music exploded into the silence. Taylor Swift's Love Story started playing at full volume. The sound startled me so badly I almost dropped the phone. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. But through the panic, I forced myself to look back at the mirror. The silhouette was gone. The space beside my bed was empty. The mirror showed nothing except my own terrified face. The door was still cracked open, but there was no movement, no sound. I didn't stop the music. I turned the volume down just enough so it wouldn't wake anyone else, and I let that song play on repeat, over and over. I stayed completely still, staring at the ceiling, afraid to look at the mirror again, afraid to turn my head, afraid to move. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight filled the room. Everything looked normal. The door was closed, the closet was empty. The mirror reflected nothing unusual. My dad and brother acted like it was any other day. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't know how to explain what I had seen. I didn't know if they would believe me. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know what I saw in that mirror. That night changed me. To this day, I cannot sleep in a room with a mirror facing my bed. I cannot leave doors cracked open at night. And no matter how silly it sounds, I still feel safer with music playing when the house goes quiet. Worst night of my life. And somehow, for reasons I still don't understand, that song made it stop. I was probably in 7th grade when this happened, and at that age, everything feels bigger, scarier, and more intense than it ever will again. I was staying over at my best friend's house for the night. He lived just outside a small town, in a rural area where the houses were spread far apart, and the roads went quiet after dark. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt isolated, in a way that made your imagination run wild. We had spent most of the evening doing what kids our age usually did when they had no supervision and too much energy. Playing video games, watching dumb movies, laughing about things that weren't actually funny. Eventually, the conversation turned to something we thought would be hilarious at the time. We decided it would be a great idea to go out and wrap some houses with toilet paper. Looking back, it was a stupid plan. But at that age, it felt rebellious and exciting. We actually asked his parents if we could go out that night. That should have been the end of it. His dad shut it down immediately. He told us no very clearly and said we were not allowed to leave the house. He wanted us to stay inside for the night. No discussion, no negotiation. That should have been the end of it. But my friend had always been bad at taking no for an answer. And I was the kind of kid who followed along even when I knew something was a bad idea. So we waited. We stayed up late, pretending to settle down for the night. Eventually, the house went quiet. The lights went out. We listened for footsteps, doors, any sign that someone was still awake. At about 1 a.m, we decided it was safe. We grabbed a giant black trash bag filled with rolls of toilet paper and quietly slipped out of the house. His house sat at the top of a hill, with a long gravel driveway that led down to the main road. The gravel crunched under our shoes, and we moved slowly, trying to keep the noise down. The night was pitch black, with no streetlights nearby, just the faint glow of the moon and the stars. We finally reached the road, The moment our shoes hit the pavement, my friend froze. He whispered that he heard a car coming and that we needed to get off the road immediately. I didn't hear it at first, but I trusted him. We both jumped down into the ditch along the side of the road and laid flat in the grass. A few seconds later, headlights appeared and a car sped by. We stayed still until the sound faded away. After a moment, we sat up, relieved, though laughing quietly about how close that was. We were just about to get moving again when my friend stiffened. "Shit, man," he whispered. "It's coming back." I didn't understand what he meant until I looked down the road. Far in the distance, I could see red brake lights. The car was slowing down. Then, right there in the middle of the road, it turned around. My stomach dropped. We immediately flattened ourselves back into the ditch. At this point, neither of us was laughing anymore. We were both wearing dark clothes, and it was completely dark outside. There was no reason for anyone to notice us. No reason for the car to be interested. The car came back down the road, but this time it was moving slowly. It passed us on the opposite side of the road. We stayed still, barely breathing, watching it through the tall grass. It drove past, which we waited. My friend kept his hand on my arm, holding me down. He slowly lifted his head just enough to see over the edge of the ditch. "Dude," he whispered, "it's coming again." By now, fear had fully set in. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the driver could hear it. The car didn't look like a police car. It was dark-colored, with no markings, no spotlight, nothing official about it. And if it wasn't a cop, then who was it? The worst possibilities flooded my mind. What if it wasn't just some random person? What if it was someone who had seen us and was looking for us? At that age, your brain doesn't jump to reasonable explanations. It jumps straight to the most terrifying ones. There was a culvert nearby, a concrete pipe that ran under the road. I started slowly army crawling toward it, thinking maybe I could hide inside if things got worse. My friend grabbed me and told me to stay still. The car rolled by again. This time it slowed down even more. Then it stopped, right over the top of us. We were pressed flat into the ground, not daring to move or look up. The car idled there for a moment, engine humming softly. Then it drove off. A few seconds passed. Then it came back again. It drove by slowly. It stopped. It drove off. This happened more than once. Each time, the fear grew stronger. We had no idea what was happening or why this car was so interested in this stretch of road. We felt trapped, exposed, and completely powerless. After the last time it drove away, we saw it go a short distance down the road. We didn't wait to see if it would turn around again. We jumped up, ditched the trash bag of toilet paper, and sprinted up the gravel driveway as fast as we could. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran. We burst into the house, slammed the door, locked everything, and set the alarms. We stood there in the dark, breathing hard, listening. A few minutes later, I looked out the window. The car was there. It was idling at the end of the driveway. Seeing it there made my blood run cold. It felt like confirmation that whatever had been happening on the road wasn't random. It knew where the house was. It knew where we had gone. We spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, armed with plastic bats and hockey sticks, because that was all we had. We didn't sleep. We just watched and waited until morning. Looking back now, as an adult, I know there are 100 explanations that don't involve something horrible. It could have been a confused driver, someone lost, someone suspicious of kids sneaking around late at night, something harmless. But tell that to 7th grade me. At that age, in that moment, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. And I've never forgotten the feeling of being hunted in the dark. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. When I was younger, around 10 or 11 years old, I lived in a house in California that sat on a fairly large piece of land. For a suburban area, it felt huge to me. The property was about an acre, which meant there was plenty of space between our house and the neighbors. As a kid, that space felt like freedom during the day, but at night, it made everything feel quieter, darker, and more isolated. My bedroom was on the side of the house that faced the side yard. That side yard wasn't empty. We kept our motorhome there, parked neatly under a large cover to protect it from the sun and weather. The motorhome was tall and bulky, and during the day it cast a long shadow across the yard. At night, it turned into a dark, silent shape that I was very familiar with, as I had looked out that window countless times and knew exactly what the yard was supposed to look like in the dark. At that age, my bedtime was strict. Around 8 o'clock, I was expected to be in bed, lights off and quiet. I didn't always fall asleep right away, though. I would often lie there listening to the house, to the distant sounds of the television, or to my dad moving around outside. My dad was the kind of person who liked to stay busy late into the night. We had a detached garage at the back of the property, and he often worked on projects out there after dark. Sometimes I'd hear tools, sometimes the garage door opening or closing, sometimes just footsteps on the gravel. That night started like any other. I had gone to bed on time and was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, letting my thoughts drift. The house was quiet, but not silent. I knew my dad was still up. That knowledge gave me comfort. It meant I wasn't alone in the dark. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't sudden or flashing. It just appeared outside my window, bathing the room in a strange yellow glow. At first, I assumed it was my dad. I figured he must be out by the motorhome, maybe checking something or moving things around, and that the light was casting shadows in a way that looked unusual. But when I looked towards the window, something felt wrong immediately. I didn't see my dad. I didn't see the familiar shadow of the motorhome. All I saw was light. This wasn't like a normal flashlight or a work light. This light was intense and uniform. It filled my entire room. Every inch, every corner, every object was clearly visible, as if the room itself had become the source of the glow. And the walls, the floor, my bed, my desk, all illuminated evenly in this deep yellow color. I knew right away that my dad didn't own anything like that. He didn't have a flashlight that bright, and certainly not one that color. This wasn't white light. It wasn't warm household light either. It was a strange, saturated yellow that didn't flicker or waver. I sat up slightly in bed, my heart starting to beat faster. For some reason, I didn't feel immediate panic. Instead, I felt frozen, like my body had decided to stop reacting. I just stared. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. It's hard to tell. Time felt stretched, unreal. It was almost like being in a trance, caught between curiosity and fear. Then I saw movement. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in the light itself. Then the shape became clearer. Standing within the glow was a figure. It looked human, but not quite. The first thing I noticed was its head. It was much too large for a normal human body. Not cartoonishly large, but noticeably wrong. The proportions didn't make sense. The body beneath it was extremely thin, far thinner than any person I had ever seen. The limbs looked fragile, almost delicate. I couldn't see facial features clearly. The light was too bright, washing out detail, but I knew it was facing me. I knew it was aware of me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared. My mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of light, that maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, that maybe I was half asleep and dreaming. But everything felt too real. I could feel the sheets under my hands. I could hear my own breathing. I was fully awake. Then the figure moved. And slowly, deliberately, it lifted one of its arms. The arm was long and thin, matching the rest of its body. It raised its hand, palm open, and waved. It wasn't a fast or frantic movement. It was calm, almost casual. That wave is burned into my memory. The moment the hand finished the gesture, the figure vanished. At the exact same instant, the light disappeared too. 1 second my room was flooded with yellow glow, and the next, it was plunged back into darkness. I sat there blinking, my eyes struggling to adjust. The room looked exactly as it always did at night. Shadows in the corners. Faint light from the hallway. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I might have imagined the whole thing. My heart was still racing, but part of my brain desperately wanted a simple explanation. Slowly, carefully, I got out of bed. I walked out of my room and into the living room, where I knew my dad would be. My legs felt unsteady, like they weren't entirely mine. When I reached the living room, I saw him sitting in his recliner, drinking a beer and watching television. He looked completely relaxed, exactly as he always did at night. I stood there for a moment, just staring at him. He looked over and asked what was wrong. I hesitated. I didn't know how to put what I had seen into words. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. Finally, I asked him a simple question. Dad, were you just out by the motorhome? He looked confused and said no. He asked why I was asking. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to tell him I had just seen a strange figure glowing outside my window. I didn't want to see disbelief or laughter on his face. So I just shook my head, mumbled something about nothing, and went back to my room. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow felt suspicious. I kept expecting the light to come back, but it didn't. The next day, in the daylight, I went outside to look around the side yard. I checked near the motorhome. I looked at the ground, the cover, the surrounding area. There were no marks, no signs of disturbance, nothing that suggested anyone or anything had been there the night before. Everything looked normal. Too normal. As the years passed, I thought about that night less often, but it never completely faded. Every now and then, the memory would surface, vivid and clear. The color of the light, the stillness, the wave, the way it vanished. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. I don't know if it was something explainable that my mind twisted into something else, or if it was something I simply don't have the framework to understand. All I know is that it felt real, it felt intentional, and it felt aware. And that's what stays with me. The feeling that whatever stood outside my window that night knew I was watching it, and chose to acknowledge me before disappearing. I grew up in a very small village, the kind of place most people would probably miss if they drove through it too quickly. There were around 60 people living there, give or take, and everyone knew everyone else. It was located near the Czech border, surrounded by fields, forests, and rolling hills. Life there was quiet, predictable, and slow. As a child, it felt safe. There were no busy streets, no crowds, no constant noise, just nature, old houses, and long winters. Because the village was so small, there wasn't much for kids to do indoors, especially in the colder months. When winter came, we spent as much time outside as possible, even after dark. Snow made everything feel magical, especially when you're 10 years old and don't yet associate cold with discomfort. Where the streets were lit by a few old street lamps that cast soft yellow circles onto the snow, and that was more than enough for us. One evening in November, my friend and I were playing outside in the snow. It was already dark, but neither of us cared. We were bundled up, laughing, throwing snowballs, and leaving messy footprints everywhere. The cold air made our cheeks sting, but it also made us feel alive. The village was silent, except for our voices and the crunch of snow under our boots. After about 20 minutes, something caught my attention. At first, I didn't understand why my stomach suddenly tightened. It was just a small shift in awareness, like when you feel someone watching you even before you turn around. I looked up towards the hill across the pond. That hill had always been there, looming quietly over the village, but we rarely paid attention to it at night. On top of that hill stood an abandoned house. The house had been empty for as long as I could remember. No one lived there. No lights ever turned on. The windows were dark, the walls worn down by time. In front of the house were several huge trees, their branches thick and tangled, casting strange shadows even during the day. At night, the place felt completely lifeless, like something frozen in time. That night, I noticed a light. It was small, very small. It sat just about 30 centimeters above the ground, near one of the large trees in front of the abandoned house. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or a street lamp. It was soft and steady, glowing in a way that immediately felt wrong. The shape of it reminded me of a lantern. More unsettling than the light itself was its position. It was low, far too low to be coming from a window. It looked like someone was squatting there, holding the light close to the ground. The glow didn't flicker or move. It just stayed there, perfectly still. At first, I didn't say anything. I stood there, watching it, trying to figure out what I was seeing. My brain searched for explanations. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe someone left something out there. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the longer I stared, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I asked my friend if she could see it too. I remember trying to sound casual, like I wasn't scared. I pointed toward the hill and asked her if she noticed the light near the abandoned house. She looked where I pointed, squinting into the darkness. Then she nodded. She could see it too, and that's when the fear really started to set in. If it had just been me, I might have convinced myself it wasn't real. But she saw it clearly, just as I did. We stood there under the streetlight, staring across the pond, talking in hushed voices about what it could be. The longer we talked, the worse it felt. Neither of us could come up with a reasonable explanation. The light didn't move. It didn't grow brighter or dimmer. It just stayed there. Eventually, the fear became too much. We stopped playing, turned around, and hurried home. Neither of us ran, but we walked fast, our boots slipping slightly on the snow. I remember looking back over my shoulder more than once, half expecting the light to follow us somehow. That night, I barely slept. The next day, we told our parents what we had seen. We tried to explain it carefully. On describing the location, the height, the way it looked like a lantern, they laughed. Not in a cruel way, but in the way adults sometimes do when they think children are imagining things. They told us it was probably just a reflection of light in one of the windows of the abandoned house. That explanation didn't sit right with me. The windows of that house were much higher than where the light had been. We knew that. We had seen the house countless times during the day. The light had been far too low to be coming from a window. Still, the adults dismissed it. Despite being scared, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to walk up the hill during the day to see if we could find anything. The snow was still thick, around 20 centimeters deep, covering everything in white. The pond was frozen solid, and the air was crisp and silent. As we climbed the hill, the village behind us grew smaller. The abandoned house looked even more unsettling up close. Its walls were cracked, and the roof sagged in places. The trees in front of it towered over us, their bare branches stretching out like twisted arms. That's when we noticed the footprints. They were coming from the direction of the nearby woods. Clear, distinct footprints, pressed deep into the snow. They crossed over pasture fences, something no one in the village would bother doing for no reason. The prints continued straight toward the tree where we had seen the light the night before. The snow around the base of that tree was stomped down. It looked like someone had stood there for a while. From there, the footprints continued through a narrow passage between the abandoned house and the barn beside it. Was under the snow in that narrow walkway were shards of old roof tiles, broken and sharp, scattered across the ground. It wasn't a place anyone would walk through casually, especially not in the middle of winter. No one in our village would ever go there. There was no reason to. The house was abandoned, the land wasn't used, the path was dangerous and pointless. And yet, someone had clearly been there. Someone had walked through deep snow, crossed fences, stood near that tree, and then disappeared behind the buildings. We stood there in silence, staring at the footprints, our fear deepening. We told people what we found. Again, they laughed. They told us we were just stupid kids, letting our imaginations run wild. They said footprints could belong to anyone, an animal, a drunk passerby, someone cutting across the land. But none of those explanations made sense to us. Animals don't stomp snow down in one spot like that. People don't walk barefoot paths of broken roof tiles for no reason. For about a month after that, we kept seeing the light. Always in the same place, always low to the ground. Sometimes we saw it together. Sometimes I saw it alone. Every time I looked up at that hill, my chest tightened. I felt watched, even when the light wasn't there. The abandoned house no longer felt empty. It felt occupied in a way that didn't make sense. Then, one day, the light disappeared. It never came back. There was no explanation. No event that marked its disappearance. It was just gone, as suddenly as it had appeared. But the feeling never left. Even after it was gone, every time I looked up that hill, I felt uneasy. Like something was still there, hidden, and waiting. The house remained abandoned, silent, unchanged. The trees still loomed. The footprints eventually vanished as the snow melted. People eventually stopped talking about it. But I never forgot. For years afterward, the memory haunted me. It wasn't just the sight of the light. It was the shared experience. The fact that my friend saw it too. The footprints. The way adults dismissed us without really listening. Even now, when I think back to that time, I remember the feeling more than anything else. The feeling of being watched. The feeling that something was happening just beyond our understanding. And the knowledge that whatever it was real enough to leave marks in the snow. And that more than anything still scares me. I was around 13 or 14 years old when this happened. Right at that age where you're old enough to move around the house on your own at night, but still young enough that the dark can get under your skin if something feels off. It was late, not deep into the night, but late enough that the house had settled into that quiet state where everything feels muted and hollow. I was upstairs, heading into the bathroom. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway on the second floor, and it had a large window that looked out over the backyard. The light in the hallway was on, casting a dim yellow glow into the bathroom, and being lazy like any teenager, I decided not to turn the bathroom light on. The hallway light was enough to see, and I wasn't planning to be in there long anyway. The bathroom window faced the back of the house, as where the yard dropped down and then rose again into a wooded hill. Beyond that hill was another small development, but it was sparsely populated, mostly trees, brush, and darkness at night. During the day, it looked harmless. At night, it felt endless. So there I was, standing there, half awake, half distracted, doing my business. I wasn't thinking about anything unusual. My mind was completely empty, the way it often is when you're doing something routine and unimportant. That's when I noticed the light. At first, it barely registered. Out in the woods, about a quarter-mile away, there was a faint glow. It wasn't bright, and it wasn't pointed at me. It looked like the backside of a flashlight beam, like someone was holding a flashlight but facing away from the house, so the light was diffused and indirect. I paused and looked at it more carefully. The light wasn't moving. It hadn't been there a moment before. It just appeared. It didn't sway or bounce the way a person walking with a flashlight would. It didn't flicker. It was just there, hovering among the trees. My first thought was that it might be some kind of motion-activated tracker light, the kind hunters use or the kind that might turn on if an animal passes by. That explanation made sense, and I didn't feel scared at first, just curious. I went back to what I was doing, but the light didn't go away. A full minute passed, and it was still there, still glowing softly, still facing away from me. That's when my curiosity turned into unease. Motion lights usually shut off pretty quickly, and even if someone was out there with a flashlight, they would have moved by now. I stepped closer to the window. As soon as I did, the light changed. It turned, not slowly drifting or wobbling, but deliberately rotating, like someone turning a flashlight in their hand. The beam swung around until it was pointed directly at me. At first it was wide and scattered, like the beam hadn't fully focused yet. Then it sharpened. The light narrowed, intensified, and focused into a strong, direct beam aimed straight at the bathroom window. It was incredibly bright. Bright enough that I could see its reflection clearly in the glass. But here's the part that still doesn't make sense to me. It didn't light up the room. The beam was bright, blinding even, but only in that narrow line between the source and me. The bathroom itself stayed dim, lit only by the hallway light. The walls didn't glow. The floor didn't brighten. It was like the light existed only for me. Then it started moving. Slowly at first, then steadily, the beam began closing the distance between itself and the window. And I don't mean the light spreading wider or brighter. I mean the source itself was coming closer. To give some perspective, this was a third-story bathroom. There was a good 40-foot drop from the window straight down to the ground. Beyond that was the yard, then the hill that rose back up into the woods. The light had been at least a quarter-mile away when I first saw it, and now it was coming toward me as if it were moving on solid ground. It didn't bounce, it didn't sway, it didn't arc downward or upward. It moved in a straight line toward the window, maintaining its height, maintaining its focus, as if whatever was producing it wasn't bound by the terrain at all. Oh, that's when fear finally hit me. Not sudden panic, but a cold, creeping realization that whatever this was, it wasn't normal. My heart started racing. My chest tightened. I couldn't hear anything else in the house anymore. My entire attention was locked on that light. It felt like it was aware of me. Like the moment I stepped closer to the window, it reacted. Like it had been waiting for me to notice it. As the light drew closer, it became even brighter. I could feel the intensity of it, even though it still didn't illuminate the room. It was as if it was shining directly into me rather than around me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and bolted for the light switch. The second my hand hit the switch and the bathroom lights came on, the light outside vanished. Not faded, not moved away. vanished. The woods outside were suddenly pitch black again, exactly as they should have been. No glow, no reflection, nothing. I rushed back to the window, my heart pounding, scanning the trees and the hill, searching for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No flashlight beam, no person, no sound. Just darkness. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My brain desperately tried to come up with explanations. A helicopter spotlight? No sound? A car? Impossible angle and distance. Someone with a flashlight? No way they could move like that. Eventually, I turned off the bathroom light and went back to my room. But I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that beam turning toward me, focusing, locking on. Even now, years later, I don't know what it was. I've replayed that moment in my head countless times. I've tried to rationalize it, to explain it away as a trick of light or imagination. But no explanation fully fits. The way it moved, the way it reacted, the way it disappeared instantly when the lights came on. Whatever it was, it noticed me. And that's the part that still unsettles me the most. Because for a brief moment, standing there in that dark bathroom, it felt like something out there in the woods had found me. And I don't think I was supposed to see it. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.